Hello, welcome to the Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. I'm Natalia Shpulova-Said, and thank you so much for attending our talk today. Our guest is Dr. Valentyna Kharkhun, and she presents on Suffering on Display, Memorialization of Victims of Soviet Regime in Ukraine. Valentyna Kharkhun is a professor in the Ukrainian Literature and Journalism Department, Nizhyn Mykola Gogol State University in Ukraine. She's the author of 2 books, 6 textbooks, and more than 100 articles. Throughout her career, she has worked mainly on the relationship between ideology and culture, focusing on the following topics: ideology in Ukrainian modernism writings, the arts under Soviet regime, socialist realist canon in Ukrainian and Russian literatures, and the ideology of memory representations on communism in museums of Central and Eastern European countries. And currently, Valentyna Kharkhun is working on a new book entitled Multi-Faceted Memory, Exhibiting the Soviet Era in Ukrainian Museums. So we will start with Valentyna Kharkhun's lecture. Please submit your comments and questions in through our Q&A option, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, or you can leave your comments in our chat box. All questions and comments will be addressed during our discussion. At this point, I invite Valentyna Kharkhun to present her topic, and thank you again for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Natalia, and thank you, Ani, for inviting me, for having me today. And my congratulations on rapid development of Ukrainian Studies Organization in Indiana University. Thank you for inviting me to join all your activities, and thank you for having me here today. So to start, let me share my screen. During perestroika and after having gained independence, Ukraine started publicly uncovered crimes committed during the Soviet time and attempted to create a memory about Soviet victimhood. Since that time, the victimhood narrative started to predominate in Ukrainian memory politics. And if we are analyzing victimhood narrative, we could distinguish 3 major topics. Here they are. These topics are very close to each other. Sometimes it's difficult even to separate them. They're overlapping, they're influencing each other, but still we can distinguish them by the way how they are portraying the victims and perpetrators, as well as in which context can we perceive them. So the first topic is the Holodomor, which portrays Soviet authority as perpetrator and Ukrainians, in major cases, Ukrainians and an ethnic group as victims. This is primarily Ukrainian topic, which distinguishes Ukraine among other post-socialist countries and presents Ukraine as the biggest victim of totalitarian regime. The second topic, Soviet occupation, which depicts Soviet Russia as an occupier and Ukrainian people as subjugated. This topic developed not only in Ukraine, but in other post-Soviet republics, such as Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So Ukraine joins them in the creating of so-called anti-Russian sentiment. And the third topic, victims of Soviet totalitarianism, which portrays Soviet authority as perpetrator and Ukrainian people as victim. This topic is the most universal. It has been developed in all post-socialist countries, in all countries of Central and Eastern Europe, which survived from the communist rules, including Russia. So today, the third topic listed, victims of Soviet totalitarianism, will be the main object of my today's talk, and primarily how this topic is portrayed in Ukrainian memorials and museums. Let me introduce the outline of my lecture. So first, I will briefly discuss the theoretical framework of my research. Then I turn to the discussion about rehabilitation and remembrance as the prime goals of Ukrainian memory politics, just to frame, to put museums and memorial in appropriate context. And then I will analyze 3 memorial museums: Bekivnyansky grave, which is located near Kiev, and 2 Lviv's museums. During my talk, I will focus on 4 prime tasks. First, I will try to analyze what kind of narrative templates have been created in a representation of Soviet repression and victimhood. Second, I will try to distinguish the regional specifics in portraying Soviet victims. Third, I will analyze the specific of physical landscape and how this the specifics on landscape influencing or predetermining the portraying of Soviet political repression. And the last one, I will try to talk about the type of martyrological language which has been created in portraying, in memorializing Soviet victims. So let's start with the theoretical framework. In coming to term with the recent past, post-socialist societies, they're facing transitional justice, which means they're trying to evaluate the criminality and brutality Soviet crimes. Post-socialist societies try to use trials, truth commissions, lustration as a way to criminalize communists through legislation. But researchers also assume that memorialization or creating appropriate commemorative practices also can be regarded as a way for transitional justice. So in this case, memorialization, commemorative practices are receiving this type of political framework. Maria Maxu trying to analyze the political usage of the past, or Soviet past in particular. She proposed the term mnemonical security, and she explains this term as a specific idea that an appropriate image of the past should be created and fixed in a public remembrance in order to use it for political purposes. In reality, in post-socialist countries, this memorial security politics ended up in promoting one-dimensional anti-communist agenda, which influences the victimhood narrative and which promoting the portraying history in martyrological terminology. In talking and in influencing, in focusing of terror, genocide, and suffering, which this led national elites to capitalize victimhood and to create an appropriate and very beneficial image of the state or society, or creating state biographical narratives. Of course, each post-socialist country builds its own narrative, its own beneficial image. But if we look at all of them, we would find this one a narrative template, which consists of 2 major images. The communist system was represented as an evil foreign power, and the occupied nation as an innocent internal entity. And also 2 corresponding topics focusing on the communist repression and genuine anti-communist resistance. In reality, this type of biographical narratives hardly work for the reconciliation or transitional justice, usually provoking conflicts, clashes inside the country and on international level. How it works, I will provide analyzing our museums. So let me turn to the overview of the rehabilitation process and remembrance. But at the beginning, let me draw your attention on the major points. When we're talking about Soviet political repression, of course, it covers the whole Soviet era. But in reality, usually in memory politics, it focuses primarily on Stalinism. Then we're talking about Stalinism and memorializing Stalin victimhoods. It will differentiate based on the regional specifics. For example, for Central and Eastern Ukraine, it would be Great Terror of 1937-1938. The bloodiest period happened in Central and Eastern Ukraine. But for Western Ukraine, we do remember different events. As we know, in 1939, western part of Ukraine when annexed by Soviet Union due to Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and this procedure was ironically called Golden September, while a lot of people were imprisoned. That Soviet troops retreated because of Nazi approached Western Ukraine. They killed a lot of innocent people without judgment, and this bloodiest event will be in the core of attention of Western Ukraine and in the process of memorialization. So these regional specifics we need to keep in mind, analyzing museum, which led us to understanding the approaches they're using. Then we're talking about the actual date that the communist crimes were uncovered. Usually researchers agreed that the turning point, 1987 should be the turning point. So it was during perestroika time, and we can assume that it probably was like a perestroika memory project, you know, to reconsider bloodiest Soviet time and to move forward to rebuild or to reconstruct the Soviet state. But in reality, the uncovering of communist crimes mostly during Stalinist period greatly influenced nationalistic movement. And here we should remember that this particular topic somehow contributed to anti-communist tendency and consequently contributed to the development of independence discourse. So in Ukraine, I would draw your attention on three major events which indicate how the memory about Soviet crimes, about victims of totalitarian regime returned to Ukraine. In 1998, it was the first commemoration practice in Bekivnya, in the biggest burial place of Soviet victims. Next year, two very important organizations were established. The All Ukrainian Society of Political Prisoners and Repressed, and also Memorial Society. As we know, Memorial Society was initiated by Sakharov, but a lot of national Soviet republics initiated the opening the Republican detachment, and in 1990, Ukrainian Memorial Society was launched. So both societies actually were their primary goal for both of them, they're to uncover communist crimes and to honor innocent victim of totalitarian regimes. So afterwards, this popular initiative, I would like to draw attention that it was popular initiative, activists, former repressed people, relatives of people who were buried in Bekivnya and other places. They actually made a first call for remembrance, necessity to remember and to commemorate. But somehow afterwards, the newly established state kind of privatized this security action. Ukraine was creating its biographical narrative, but having declared itself as a victim of totalitarian regime and promoting its anti-Soviet discourse and enrich a discourse of independence. It could be clearly viewed in a legislative process. Let's see here the list of different decrees and laws which were passed during several years in order to honor victims, in order to commemorate. The first one, it was April 17, 1991. I would like to emphasize that it was for several months before Ukraine declared independence. The decree about rehabilitation of victims of political repression in Ukraine was passed. It's a very indicative a document. It's only one page with a simple statement that the state is actually recognizing victims of political repression of Ukraine. There is no estimation about Soviet crimes or anything like that. But existence of this document clearly showed that state was ready to honor victims and to return their dignity. So right after, 1 year later, in April 1992, Verkhovna Rada of already independent Ukraine issued a special decree about preparation multi-volume publications of research and documents about victims of political repression, which ended up in the long-term project called Rehabilitated by History. Up to now, we have 120 volumes from planned 140 volumes. So this project is still in process, covering all regions of Ukraine and collecting all data about political repressions. Also, this decree and the whole tendency caused that Academy of Sciences of Ukraine declared that political repression, Soviet totalitarianism, political repression, and victims of communist crime should be in a core of attention for Ukrainian scholars. And now, when we look at the bibliography, we can find at least 9,000 items. It's research, books, articles covering particular this topic. And so we can tell, we can assume that this topic is quite well started. Of course, there is more to do, but at least it's been the primary focus for researchers. The next topic I would like to talk, analyzing this legislative process, it's how for some time two victimhood narratives as the Holodomor and political repression coexisted and how they split. If you look at number 3 and number 4, in December 6, 2002, then President Leonid Kuchma signed a decree on measures in connection to the 70th anniversary of Holodomor in Ukraine. This decree foresees the creation of the museum devoted to the Holodomor and also for political repression in Kiev. 2 years later, the law established the Day of Remembrance for victims of famines and political repressions. So for quite a bit, these two topics coexisted and were united in state-ruled memory politics. But already in 2007, it was already during Yushchenko's presidency, he issued the law about the 70th anniversary of Great Terror and mass political repressions. And this law foresees the Day of Remembrance for the victims of political repression. So this is a moment that these two topics are split. And as we know, in 2008, the museum, which was planned, the Museum for the Holodomor and Political Repression in Kiev, it was opened and having a completely different title and being devoted exclusively to the victims of 3 famines Ukraine went through. And the last moment, please let's see the first column. After Euromaidan, and especially after the decommunization laws were passed, the document which was created in 1991 received 5 editions. And now the document, the title of document sounds completely different. I would like to draw your attention that this is quite a long document with a lot of pages explaining all peculiarities of rehabilitation process. But what is the most interesting and the most important, and it can be seen on the title of this document, that finally the communism received its evaluation. It's called the communist totalitarian regime. And the second, which is also very important, not only Stalin time was recognized as the bloodiest time, but the whole Soviet period is indicated in the regime of 1917 and 1991. Um, uh, so let's turn to the remembrance actions. So today we can find at least 180 monuments and memorial plaques devoted to the victims of Soviet terror. Here you can see a short list, and please take a look. You could see that the map of martyrology, Soviet martyrology, was created, ranging from the western part of Ukraine, from Chernobyl, to the eastern part, like Luhansk and Donetsk. And of course, Ukrainian memorial museums. There are at least 10 memorial museums devoted exclusively to the coverage of the topic of communist repression and communist victims. I can distinguish at least three main features in analyzing those museums. The first one, all of them are located in the places of memory. That's at communist quarter, KGB quarters, prisons, or burial places, which means they're authentic places, and which means that the curators, the managers of the museum, facing the very big problem of dealing with authenticity. So because authenticity usually dictates what kind of history should be told and in which way it should be told. Second feature, if you look at the dates, then they're established, so we can assume that memorializing or museumification of the topic of Soviet victims was in close attention, because it started even before the Ukrainian independence and up to now, because the Museum of Totalitarian Regime Territory of Terror, even though it's launched and it's open for visitors, it's still in the process of construction. And the last one, the third feature, the most striking for me, if you look in the, geography, I was trying to highlight the places their memorial museums are located. You would see that only the second one, the National Historical and Cultural Reserve Bekemyansky Mohyly, located in the eastern part of Ukraine, in Nadnepranska, Ukraine, while all others, all 9 museums located in the western part of Ukraine, it's very illuminating, especially if we are comparing with the memorial places which all over Ukraine. So I will, from all 10, I'm choosing only 3 museums, Bekemyansky Mohyly and a prison on Lonsky Street, as well as Territory of Terror, because they are quite well, relatively quite well developed cultural institutions, which influences the visibility of this topic, Soviet victimhood. So let's start with the National Reserve, National Cultural Reserve Bekemyansky grave. Here a couple pictures, and let me start with the prehistory of this place. This place is located in the outskirts of Kiev in Darnitz forest. And during 1937-1941, this place was used by NKVD for secretly burning the corpse. NKVD used this place up to the moment that Nazi occupied Kiev and neighboring territories. And this place actually first was discovered by Nazis, and they arrived to Kiev, and they immediately collected data and used this place in anti-communist propaganda. So when Soviets returned to Kiev, they did almost the same. They used this place in anti-Nazi propaganda, anti-fascist propaganda, stating that this place was used for burying victims of Nazi occupation. So it was several state commissions investigating Bykivnya in 1994, 1971, and 1987. And all state commissions failed to recognize that this is an actual burial place for Soviet victims. It's impressive because it's ready, as I mentioned, 1987, it's actual time then the truth about Soviet crimes started to uncover and kind of discussed in society. But in 1988, based on the last commission, Soviet authorities decided to construct a monument of inscription. Please look, it's very indicative how it's been portrayed, how it's been told. Internal memory, he is buried soldiers, partisans, underground fighters, civilians tortured by Nazi occupiers in 1941, 1945. But as I said, it was a time then it was already hard to cover the truth, and a lot of activists, primarily journalists, paid a lot of attention to make a call. So it's ended up that the next commission was finally organized, and this commission in 1989 finally recognized Bykivnya as a burial place for victims of the Soviet regime. So here's the list of dates which indicates how Bykivnya as a place of remembrance went through this legislative procedure. So in 1994, finally, President Kuchma signed an order on measures to honor memory of victims in Bykivnya. A little bit later, in 2001 and 2006, Prime Minister of Ukraine, then already President Viktor Yushchenko, opened this place and gave the status of national reserve, which of course lifted the status of the place and made much more important the message this place should be delivered. And this place was opened as a national reserve in 2008, and in 2011, the reserve announced the plan for future development. I actually was lucky to find this plan, and it's quite impressive, very interesting, very professionally made, but unfortunately up to now, almost anything was done. So here is also interesting list indicating the history of recognition, because of course the decree was signed in 1994, but only in 1998 this is the Kyiv mayor was the first official after 1994 to visit this place. And for the long time, if you look at these numbers and people who visited this place, it's clearly indicates that for quite a long, it was not a place for visit for high Ukrainian officials, but instead it's been visited by very important foreigners. Like in 2001, Pope John Paul II visited this place. What is interesting that this place was not in his schedule, so it was his desire to come here with no press, with no coverage, just to visit this place. But of course, it was very illuminating for Ukrainians, of course, for Poles and other people in the world. And only in 2005, Viktor Yushchenko, president of Ukraine, visited this place already as officially, and started the tradition to visit this place to commemorate victims in a day of remembrance. And the last moment I would like to draw your attention, for me, this is the very crucial moment in recognition of this place. In 2011, then President Viktor Yanukovych, he was very successful, I should say this, governed Bronislaw Komorowski, at that moment the president of Poland, and his three Ukrainian predecessors, three Ukrainian president, for the very sacred, very pathetic moment, placement of the memorial's cornerstone. This is the moment, for me at least, very indicating that this place finally received the highest attention. So now, how this place was commemorated? We can distinguish at least three major periods. So the first one, grassroots commemoration at the end of 1980s, at the beginning of 90s, activists, relatives, former repressed people, they made their tribute to the memory of Soviet victims, and they created like crosses and kind of symbolic graves, just to make this first step in commemoration. It's interesting because in further development of landscape, these first steps, they are preserved, and for me it was very well done, because it's memorizing actually this first step, grassrooted initiative in commemorating victims of totalitarian regime. So the next step was made in 1995 in creating of memorial, which consisted of 7 items. Two major items. The first one at the entrance of the National Reserve. It can be seen on the left side. This is a figure of repressed person, and another major site is right in the center of forest. It is a kind of mass grave with the cross, and they united by the path with 5 stones with different messages. 2 stones with crosses, 2 stones with 1 stone with the 2 stones, I'm sorry, with the kind of natural message saying that here the brutal place for Soviet victims, but 2 of them very interesting because they're delivering very emotional message, such as you have a freedom, this is the most important in your life, and we paid our lives for your freedom. And the third stage, the third period in commemorating, launched in 2012 by opening the International Memorial, which consists of 2 parts: the Ukrainian one, which could be seen on the left side, and the Polish one, which can be seen on the right side. It's a very long story of Polish traces in Bekivnia, and the discovering Polish traces in Bekivnia. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to talk about this, because it could be a separate story. I would draw attention in several very important monuments, which can help us to understand the controversy of Bekivnia and commemorating procedures in Bekivnia. So at the beginning of the 90s, SBU released a document, the list of citizens of interwar Poland executed in a territory of Soviet Ukraine. This list consisted of 3,435 people. And lately, this list was called by Polish side, it's so-called Ukrainian Katyn list. The name, the title, which was highly discussed in Ukraine by Ukrainian historians. And since then, it was several exhumation from Polish side in Bekivnia, and Polish side, Poland wanted to create this memorial, since this memorial, this is the 4th Polish military cemetery. In this case, this Polish military cemetery joined 3 other places of commemoration. The first one in Katyn, the main place for commemoration, and then Mednoye, both in Russia. Third one in Kharkiv, Pyaty-Khatki, and in Bekivnya, this is the fourth military cemetery. It was a long process of negotiations because Ukrainian side was against this title, since it's proved that not only military people buried in Bekivnya, and moreover, not only Polish people, it's people of interwar Poland, and not on 3,435 people. So it's kind of symbolic place for commemoration. It's a not real place of burial. So this accuracy, inaccuracy in portraying in memorialization practice still kind of make this memorial kind of very complicated place, because either exhumation was kind of semi-illegal, and as far as I know, this place still doesn't have a juridical documentation. So this place, Bekivnya, which is potentially can be the place for for portraying the suffering of multiple nations, and for creating like solidarity based image of victims, sometimes sometimes can be seen as a place of contested victimhood, unfortunately. And the last moment, as it was planned, the museum should be created, and the time for opening, as it was scheduled, it was 2020. But unfortunately, up to now, there is no museum. Starting from 2016, museum researchers are making an incredible work of creating temporary exhibition, like small scale exhibition, but of course they can cover the existence of the whole museum. So Bekivnya, we can say that the landscape was constructed, and the truth was undraped, but yet Bekivnya remains a silent place of memory, functioning as a local and international symbol of political repression. And so we can ask themselves how this place, being a very impressive, very important place for Ukrainians, as Yuri Shapoval, the very well historian, stated that Bekivnya is the very important place for our search our identity. So how this place talking to people, what kind of message this place are providing. Then let me turn to the last point, last part of my presentation, Lviv museums. I would like to talk about two museums, the Memorial Museum of Victims of Occupation Regimes, Prison on Lonsky Street, and Memorial Museum of Totalitarian Regimes, Territory of Terror. They both located in Lviv, in the regional center, which is very active in creating different memorial projects on commemorating Soviet victimhood and also the Holocaust. As you can see, even on the both places located in authentic places, which witness multiple atrocities. And as you can see on the titles, they both focused on multiple occupations, multiple totalitarian regimes. So this is momentarily actualizes the appropriate context for these museums to be perceived. I mean, the museums listed below, it's so-called museums of occupations located in 3 Baltic countries, and the House of Terror in Hungary opened in 2002. What is interesting that those museums portraying using the principle of double genocide, which means they're portraying their societies as being victims of both Nazi and Soviet crimes. But this particular group of museums received a huge discussion, huge critique from all over the world in different group of interested people, like researchers, journalists, and Jewish community. They were accused in manipulating by history, and moreover by downplaying the Nazi atrocities and the Holocaust victims. So the question is just asking, knocking the door. How about Ukrainian museums? Do they use a different approach? What new practices are they using, exploring in promoting this double genocide principles? So let's look at the first museum, prison on Lonsky Street. This is the prison which served during 3 occupations, as it said, Polish, Nazi, and Soviet. This museum actually the place witnessed different multinational atrocities, and it can be viewed, and it's very important for a lot a lot of memories. Potentially the authenticity of this place tells that the universal image of universal suffering can be created, but instead, this museum taken different approach of universalism and selectivity. The museum was opened, launched in 2009, and lately received the status of national, which is the highest status, and making this institution much more visible. So here, let's look at the main principles, the main goals, which can be found on the museum site. It's how the museum, the starting point for the museum, what it says. The museum is regarded as a symbol on the invincibility of liberation struggle of Ukrainians. So the main ideas, it's fight of good over evil, the greatness of spirit of struggle and sacrifice for independence. Other nations suffered, and Ukrainians won independence for themselves and for others. So I try to highlight the most symbolic, the most impressive words which can lead us to make the statements. So I would like to distinguish 3 main aspects from this presentation of the museum, that it's based on mythological ethnocentric vision, a nationalist inspired historical policy, and prevalence of resistance topic. So when we are looking at the suffering, and the basic term for this type of museums, and for this in particular, we would say that in this case, suffering is positioned in a specific context for serving the idea of fighting for Ukrainian independence. And this particular political purpose predetermines the principle of selectivity. Even those that a museum stating that it would consider free occupations, in reality it focuses primarily on the Soviet occupation. 2 others, Polish and Nazi occupations, serve as a specific context. Especially Nazi occupation helps to highlight the criminality of the Soviet occupation. So it's how the image of perpetrator of evil was constructed. So now, how is the image of victim? Only representative of Ukrainian nationalistic movement are displayed as victims and heroes, as fighters for independence. Silence is their responsibility for being perpetrators of crimes against humanity. Moreover, which is very interesting, this place actually has a history, touches upon the later dissident movement, and actually dissidents were the activists to establish this museum. But this museum, even having this history, this museum is not portraying the later dissident movement. And moreover, in museum, there is an omission of Jewish suffering as an integral part of the history of prison. So there is a part of told story, and there is a huge part of untold story. So as a result, the museum exhibition exploits Soviet victimhood by constructing an ethnocentric image of Ukrainian nation and portraying Ukrainian nationalists exclusively as fighters for Ukrainian independence. So in this case, this museum made a profound contribution to creation of this beneficial image of mnemonical secularization and beneficial image of for Ukrainian biographic narratives. And a couple minutes on the last museum, Museum Territory of Terror. As I already said, it was open for visitors in 2017, but still in process of construction. So we can't make conclusions how it will look. I can analyze, I can assume how it would be developed just based on contemporary practice of temporal exhibitions. And I would like to draw your attention on a very interesting exhibition. There is a book based on this exhibition available online for everybody. I'm inviting you to look at that. It's very interesting, very informative. So exhibition launched in 2018 in order to commemorate 75th anniversary on Lviv ghetto and Yanovska concentration camp. This museum actually located in also memory place, Lviv ghetto and transit prison in post-war period. So this particular exhibition focusing on the Holocaust victims was created as a temporary exhibition, but it would be used as a permanent exhibition. And it gives me believe that probably this museum would be much more accurate in quoting two totalitarian regime and in portraying two groups of victims. And let me conclude. So as you see, remembering victims of Soviet repression was a prime task on state level, on regional level. It's attracted a lot of memory actors and actually who were focused on criminalizing communism and actually making this transitional justice. Erection memorial all over Ukraine. Once again, there is at least 180 places with memorials and plaques created a specific martyrological landscape, and it's highly contributed to creating the memory about communism, about victims of communism, and especially it's benefited to the portraying Ukraine as a victim of Soviet regime, but yet exhibiting victimhood or telling the history of Soviet atrocities in the museums complicated the biographical narrative. As we could see at Bykivnya, there is no permanent narrated exhibition, there is no museum, and we can't even estimate then it would be constructed. Its functions, so Bykivnya functions primarily as a ritual place, sometimes once a year, for commemoration of Ukrainian and Polish victims of Stalinist crimes. Lviv Museum, on contrary, show that criminalizing communism and silences other atrocities tends to create an exclusive and anthrocentric versions of history, and it definitely doesn't work for the reconciliation and transitional justice. And the last point, the commemorating practices in Ukrainian Memorial Museum highlight the necessity to create an exclusive and solidarity-based victimhood narrative, which honor the memory of victims of communist regime, but at the same time, it's promote democratic values in Ukrainian society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valentyna. Uh, would you mind stop sharing your screen at this point? Uh,
I
Thank you.
believe
Thank
I've
you so
done
much
it.
for your talk. Thank you so much
I
for your
hope it
presentation.
works.
So we welcome your comments and we welcome your questions at this point. And while we're waiting for our questions, well, I would like to go back to one of your slides, where you specified that the majority of the monuments were located in Western Ukraine, while in Central or Eastern Ukraine, we don't see that many of those monuments. And you said that it's quite illuminating. So could you elaborate a little bit on this point? What does this amount of monuments, particularly in Western Ukraine, gesture to?
Thank you for the question. Yes, once again, monuments are all over Ukraine, but memorial museums primarily in Western Ukraine. Of course, I ask myself that question: why it's like that? I believe it's because the problem of the creating narration. So memorial, it's usually projected as a place to mourn, right, to commemorate victims. It's kind of it's a site for rituals, for commemorative practices, and that's it. So usually it touches upon our human nature, to mourn victims. Then we're talking about narration. Narration is much more complicated because it's not about victims. It's usually also about perpetrators. It's usually about context. It's usually about, let's say, unpleasant questions. And they at least should be asked. If there is no, let's say, simple answer, it should be at least asked in a very good developed museum as a cultural institutions. Usually it's very difficult to do, just to face the problem of talking about this particular unpleasant moments. It also can be explained by the also to the attitude to the Soviet times. It's no wonder that usually in Western Ukraine the anti-Soviet and anti-Russian sentiment is much more clear, is much more powerful in comparison with Eastern Ukraine. So it's also can be the reason why in Western Ukraine a lot of institutions at least are trying to talk about this very controversial topic, while in Eastern Ukraine it's the primarily memorials and that's it. And plus the third explanation, as I said, it's two different memories. In Ukraine it's memories of 1937, 1938. In Western Ukraine, it's memory of Golden September. And the fourth explanation that just came to my mind, in Eastern Ukraine, it's also memory about the Holodomor. So it also took a lot of space, a lot of attention to memorialize the Holodomor victims.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you. We have a question from Hiroaki Kuromiya. What's the current status and the role of the Institute of National Memory?
Oh, well, as far as I know, it works. It continues in some way the policy which was established during the time that Vladimir Petrovich was the director of Institute of National Remembrance. As far as I know, nothing major was changed. The difference that could be seen since the active phase of documentization is already done. So now what the Institute is doing, facing kind of the major difficult cases, and they're trying to deal somehow with that. As far as I remember, I was trying to look precisely about the change in the heads, because it's usually changing the memory policy. Pan Dropovich, actually he is not bringing something completely new. The one thing he's trying to do, instead of rush policy of demolishing monuments, he's trying to make a discussion. He's trying to activate thinking of locals about their memory, about organizing public spaces. It's what he is doing. I can sure that it's very successful politics, but still, I believe this is the way how it should be. It's not the decision which made somewhere on the top high political level, but also local population should participate in the making decision. And as far as I know, all other projects as Maidan Museum, the Holodomor Museum, and other topics is still in process of development. They probably, it just seems to me they are less visible because they less participated in events which lately could be called like a scandal. So that's why it's probably, it can be seen like they are less active. No, I can see the director and the researchers from the institute in a lot of occasions they're active, and they actually they continue to do what was started doing Volodymyr Vetrovich as he was director of the institute.
Mhm. Thank you. I have a question about the coexistence of communist narratives and anti-communist, anti-totalitarian, and victimhood narratives. When those monuments were established during the 90s, they didn't exist in some pure space, right? They communicated also with the previous monuments which actually promoted communism. And maybe you can also talk a little bit about the removal of communist monuments, about decommunizing the space in Ukraine as well. But there was, like you said, there are a lot of complex questions, and I would say contested questions. So how do these new narratives maybe conflate, or maybe if they not conflate, maybe how they interfere with the previous narratives, and to what, how effective probably this coexistence can be? Because like you said, there are a lot of monuments or memorials in Western Ukraine, while we don't have that many in Eastern Ukraine, which means that different narratives will navigate, will circulate within one country, and different memories will be created as well, with at least different aspects of cultural or political memory will be highlighted or emphasized.
Yes, thank you. There is a lot of points in your question. I would like to focus only the major one: coexistence of different memorials in the same area, in the same landscape. Yes, if you could, if we can look back at before, let's say 2015, we could see coexistence memorials like the monument to Lenin, a monument to Holodomor victims. Sometimes they are placed so close to each other, and this is a problem. Who made the decision, and how it was done? And it's clear shows that it was not public discussion about that, so we can accept it. Okay, it was a lot of monuments, Lenin monuments in Ukraine. Actually, in comparison with all Soviet republics and all socialist republics, Ukraine had the biggest number of Lenin monuments. And even 2015, especially in central and eastern part of Ukraine, it was a great number of Lenin monuments still existed. And plus, we started to put these monuments, usually also grassroots rooted initiatives, like to the Holodomor victims, to the Soviet victims, and we accepted this kind of let's call it mnemonic schizophreny, which is accepted. And I believe we accepted because, as I already said, it was no discussion, that something should be prohibited, something should be erased from our streets, because it's not only the monument, it's a message, and this message is delivered daily, and this all these messages afterwards creating a narrative, and we're living in this Soviet space. So yes, it was kind of cacophony, but we started to discuss it just several years ago during the decommunization. Then the decommunization laws passed, and we started to look, yes, in our streets a lot of monuments which should be demolished, and we need to organize this space. And how and now, as you can see, probably it's the topic for future research, how next to the monuments to the Holodomor and Soviet victims, also a lot of memorials all over Ukraine to the Heavenly Hundred and to soldiers were lost in Ukrainian Russian war. And it's also, it would play a role of this major message. So I believe step by step we kind of clean the space and create new memorials and a new landscape.
Thank you. We have two questions. One is in Ukrainian and another one is in English. So I'll start with one which is in Ukrainian, and I'll read it out in Ukrainian, and then we will rephrase it in English. Валентино, дякую за чудову лекцію, яка підштовхує до багатьох прозрінь. This question is from Тетяна Гребенюк. Відсутність меморіалів на сході України вражає. Очевидно, під впливом гібридної ідентичності цих регіонів. Їх постання не настільки органічне, як на Заході. А в Росії є такі меморіали або щось наближене? So the question is about, again, these memorials, which are established in Western Ukraine, but we don't see that many of the memorials in Eastern Ukraine, and probably, as Tatiana Urbanuк suggests, it's somehow connected with hybrid identities in these regions. And the question is about whether we have similar memorials in Russia or something like this.
Yes, thank you so much. Once again, I would like to clarify, there are memorials in Eastern Ukraine. It's covered by memorials. There is no museums, like thematical museums covering specifically the topic of Soviet victims. This is a difference, and this is specific, that there is a memorials all over Ukraine, but there is a museum specifically in Western Ukraine. Yes, and thank you for question about Russia. It's a separate topic, and I can talk for very, very long time because it's a very tricky question, and this particular issue shows the ambivalence of Russian policy regarding Soviet victimhood. Several years ago, a very important, very visible memorial, Stena Skorbi, was opened in Moscow. As far as I remember, probably the opening ceremony was attended by Putin, if I'm not mistaken. That I can't tell. So what is Russian authority is doing? So they publicly showing, yes, they're caring about victimhood, they're paying a tribute, and so on. But if you put it in a context, here it should be several points. I would name only one. If you look, for example, on the situation surrounding the Memorial Museum, Perm 36, Perm 36, it's a very important museum for us too, because Vasily Stus and other dissidents were imprisoned there. How the state several years ago privatized, took from private hands, and trying to govern this museum, and trying to change completely the policy of this museum. For you to understand, they're trying to portray also the unhappy life of KGB people for looking for prisons, claiming that it's a different side of reality. So it's difficult to tell how the policy surrounding this museum has been changed. And plus, it's also the event which was covered by media all around the world, the arrest of Dmitriev, the person who discovered Sandarmoh, and this, criminal procedure, how it's been made, clearly showing that Russian authorities would punish people who uncovering Soviet crimes, because it's something which doesn't benefit to the current Russian authority in creating this myth of big country and Stalin as a manager. So the politics, Russian politics regarding Soviet victimhood is very tricky and very ambivalent.
Thank you. And we have a comment from Hiraki Kuromiya. I visited Bykivnya in 2005 or so. I was struck by the presence of crosses all over. I knew well that not just Christians, but others, Jews, Koreans, Chinese, etc., were buried there. I have no objection to crosses at all, but I wonder if there is any sentiment for making Bykivnya into an interfaith place. Maybe it's already an interfaith site in conception and spirit.
Yes, thank you so much for this question. There's numbers of crosses. First, which was erected as a result of grassroots root initiatives. And second, I forgot to tell in my presentation that 87 crosses were erected during the memorialization in 1995 to somehow to organize this space as an entity and to create this space look like a graveyard or Ukrainian necropolis. Yes, you're absolutely right that people of different religions buried where it's unfortunately maybe our Ukrainian way of commemorating. Here I'm talking not about victims of communist regime, but also the Holodomor, all the places of commemoration. They decorated, they presented using Orthodox or religion imagery like crosses, angels, chapels, and so on. It's probably our desire, as I said, to promote that idea that the biggest victim of Soviet totalitarianism were Ukrainians, and Ukrainians understood as not a multinational society, but primarily Ukrainians in the NAFIC group. And it's touching upon not only memorialization, but also our search for our identity. So very, very core of our identity. And when we will discuss it and somehow change this policy, probably it should be done differently. I completely agree with you that we need to make it look as welcoming, multinational, and also paying tribute to people who represents different ethnic groups and different religions. It would be our new step in commemoration projects, and I believe it could be done.
And I have one more question about this idea about museums, which you mentioned a few times, and maybe this question is more of a theoretical nature rather than practical. So you specified a couple of times that it's important maybe, or museums should be opened up not only in Western Ukraine, but in Eastern Ukraine as well. So I just happened to attend a talk which was dedicated to British colonialism, and they were talking about the museum of British colonialism, but this idea of museum was not connected with a building. So so my question is, maybe this concept of museum can be transformed, or it can be modified so that it talks to people in a more productive way. Because, well, I guess that will be our separate conversation about what museums do and how they constructed and who creates those museums. But still, why in your opinion a museum would be important? That memorials are present, they do exist, however, they should be supported by museums. That's how I understood your position. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Once again, a museum given a story, and a museum given is a space to think. I believe that that story, a tragic story of the Soviet past, can serve. I don't like this kind of pedagogical language, but still can serve for contemporary life a little bit different than playing this political or realizing this political. Goals. I believe that a museum can attract to think, critically think. And just to give you an example, because I can theorize for a very long time, but the practical example could visualize how it should be. I personally like the museum at Tuskulani Memorial Park, which is located in Vilnius. It's very similar to Bekivnya because it's also the burial place for people who were killed in KGB quarter in the center of Vilnius and buried in this place. And it's very impressive how they are dealing with this place. So they created the columbarium, then you can find all information about all victims. But was more impressive for me this narrated story. And there's several rooms, but I would draw your attention to two rooms united by the specific arch. Then you stay in, inside this arch. You can look to the right and you can look to the left. Then you look into the right, there is a big figure of Archbishop, which was killed by KGB. Then you look into the left, you can see the KGB general who signed the order to kill this archbishop. And then you're staying and you're looking, two people, citizens of the same country, taking different paths, making different moral decisions. And you started to think what pushed them to do this or that decision. And there is no glorification of archbishop, and there is no condemning of this general who consequently also became the victim of totalitarian regime. But there is a question, and a museum can push us to think about that, to look at the past, not at something which is already understood by itself, but as a time which can give us a lot of example and push us to think and to make a right decision right now. And I believe this is the role of museum. The memorial, the monument wouldn't do that. Once again, memorial is place to mourn, to pay a tribute, to honor victims. Museum, this is a place to think. This is a place that somebody could find questions, maybe not always answers, but can ask themselves how to do, how to make a decision. And I believe this is the role of museum, and the museum about Soviet victims or Soviet totalitarianism could pay a great tribute to the to the Ukrainian people, even to think how we should memorialize. Can we use this Christian symbols? So this is a museum. That's why museum.
So museum is a construct, and museum also contributes to constructing memory as well, but
Yes.
it doesn't mean that
Yep.
this memory will be one direction or one
Yes.
dimensional memory, but it can also be
Museum, it's a place. In museum, it's a place for discussion. This is the biggest difference between museum and good museum. I would say good museum. Good museum. It's the difference between museum and memorial.
Well, I think we have our topic for our next episode. What is a good museum? And how do we
Yeah,
build good museums?
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Valentyna. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, for your wonderful talk, and thank you for offering these venues and these inquiries for further explorations. Thank you so much.
Thank you for invitation. It was my pleasure.
Today, Valentyna Kharkhun presented on Suffering on Display, Memorialization of Victims of Soviet Regime in Ukraine. Thank you for attending our lecture. Information about our upcoming events will be posted on the UkrSO listserv and our Facebook page, Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. You can also view our previous lectures and talks on our YouTube channel, and for future events, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for attending our talk today.
Thank you.